Hello, Husker fans. Back this week for another Pick Six podcast. We're on the eve of a whole bunch of things. I think we're on the eve of a couple of huge commits that may reshape the future of Nebraska football. We are also on the eve of the Nebraska volleyball team playing in the Final Four against Pittsburgh. That will happen 6 p.m. Thursday night. We'll have all kinds of coverage, obviously, of Nebraska's journey to Tampa. We're not going to talk a ton on this podcast. There's going to be some more volleyball specific podcasts that people can listen to on our website. But of course, the Nebraska volleyball team, you wish them the best of luck. And as Evan Bland and Tom Shatel know, and I know as well, they have a bunch of 5 stars on that team. And when you have a lot of real talent, 4 All-Americans, I think all 4 of them are 5-star players. When you have that much talent on a team, it's almost inevitable that they're going to do pretty well. And so Nebraska volleyball will have a chance in the Final Four. They play Pittsburgh, then they'll play, if they win, they'll play the winner of Wisconsin and Texas, two nemesis of Husker volleyball over the years. But speaking of 5 stars, we're going to get right into it. We have a lot of stuff to go through as it relates to Nebraska football recruiting. I don't know that I thought we would be here 2 weeks ago talking about a 5-star transfer potentially in Kyle McCord. I really didn't think we would be here 2 weeks ago talking about a 5-star recruit in Dylan Raiola, but here we are. And gentlemen, it's been quite a 48 hours for the Husker football. Nothing obviously is official yet, but it does appear that Nebraska is trending in the direction of not just signing 1, but 2 quarterbacks.
Yeah, we're on high alert, Sam. It's by the time people listen to this, who knows? It could happen while we're recording. It's kind of that time. I've seen so many eye emojis and red balloon emojis from assistant coaches and incoming recruits. There's this anticipation for sure. And like you said, it feels like this could be a program defining moment as it moves forward in the Matt Rule era, where you could potentially sign or bring in a guy in McCord to be that bridge. And you wrote about it, but be that bridge for 24 and then hand the keys to the car to Raiola for the next couple seasons, potentially after that. So pretty remarkable if this all does come together, that they would have been able to do that. It speaks to the staff taking a swing. It speaks to the urgency. It speaks to probably the NIL operation. It speaks to a lot of different things. But wow, what a 48 hours, and that Monday night was one of the more wild ones, I think, in recent Nebraska recruiting history, at least from a positive perspective.
And nothing was really reported either. Nothing's official. Railways can't say anything really, except for some kid on On3 who does edits, and he said Dylan Raiola is taking an official visit this weekend. But it feels like all these things are happening, doesn't it, Tom?
Yeah, I just follow along, and we don't have any facts. We just have crystal balls. I used to have a crystal ball, and then it stopped working. So, yeah, this is college football today. After the season, you can have and we have obviously the early signing date, but you've got portal day now, and a few weeks ago it looked like Matt Rule was trying to talk about how much money quarterbacks were making, and talking about how he really didn't want to, he wasn't excited about getting into a bidding war, and Jeff Sims was still there, and we didn't really know what the future of that position was going to be, if it was going to change at all, and who he might get. And if this happens, it's an extreme makeover. it's unbelievable. And now you've got the possibility that the Bellevue West kid, Daniel Kalen, might leave, or he's apparently word today is he's going to visit another school. So, wow, yeah, it kind of takes your breath away. But that's just college football today, and there have been other kids who have. The recruit flipping is not new necessarily, but I don't know. I'm trying to get a hold of it. I can't imagine what your Nebraska football fan today is thinking. Possibly about the excitement of who might come, but you don't want to lose one of the homeboys either, and especially one who helped recruit some other players in his class. So, and so you've got people thinking about what might happen there. So, wild times.
For sure it is. Certainly with Nebraska as it stands right now, obviously Danny Kaelin, according to I think 247, maybe even On3, will be visiting Michigan State, who has a new head coach in Jonathan Smith. Kaelin obviously decommitted from Missouri to commit to Nebraska once Nebraska knew that Dylan Raiola was going to commit to Georgia. That was in May. Raiola committed on May 15th. By that end of that weekend, Kaelin was in the class, and quite honestly, it stood there for what amounted to the next 7 months. I think that the process with Raiola, Nebraska did a really good job of building the relationship. Once Matt Rule got there, I think everybody there likes Matt, and I think he has a good relationship with Donovan Raiola. I don't think these things are correlated at all, but Donovan Raiola got a huge raise. I mean, he got $175,000 raise to $500,000, and his contract now matches up with the other positional assistants at Nebraska. So Donovan's being well paid and retained, and from everything I've heard, the players like him and he's doing a good job. So I think the relationship was strong there. I think that helped, but based on some of the whatever you want to do, but phone calls I've made and intel I've tried to gather, it appears that there was some sort of impasse between Georgia and Dylan Raiola, and it may have cropped up late last week when Georgia's making its in-home visit to Raiola, and you're sitting now in this weird moment where, like, I don't know that anybody really knows exactly what happened at Georgia. I've read some recruiting reports, I think from Rivals, the Georgia Rivals site, that Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, is at Dylan's high school today, trying to, I don't know, win it back over. I mean, Raiola moved to Buford High School in order to be closer to Georgia. Buford, as Evan knows, is the school of Gabe Ervin and Anthony Grant. Yes? Yep. Is that right? Yeah. So, I mean, this is a school that Nebraska already knows too, but it's all moved very, very quickly. And I've kind of heard it was somewhat NIL related, but I don't think Dylan needs money. And it's just not true. I mean, he's the son of a millionaire. Dominic Raiola is, has plenty of money. I do feel like, though, that there's things that maybe Dylan wants to do with NIL and be a part of in good ways, and Nebraska may be able to provide more infrastructure for that. It's really kind of hard to tell. So it's a unique situation, I think, with Dylan, but Nebraska, I think, had kept a good, strong relationship. I don't think USC was an option. Malachi Nelson is there. I actually think Dylan Raiola is a better player than Malachi Nelson, but we'll see. But Malachi Nelson's there, and my sense is that it just didn't quite fit with Lincoln Riley or whatever. And Oregon's got its own deal going on. Be honest with you, Oregon might have been an interesting choice a month ago because their top recruit just left because Dylan Gabriel just showed up. And so it's a weird deal there. So they're just, I think it was really just Nebraska. If he wasn't going to go to Georgia, he's going to go to Nebraska, and here it is. I mean, it's just been sort of given on I don't know exactly what Georgia did or didn't do. But I don't think Georgia was in a position to, they have 7 5-stars in the class, so they don't have to worry about it, maybe the way a school like Nebraska would. But here we go, Evan. I mean, they have an opportunity to get one of the 3 or 4 5-star quarterbacks in any given class, and that does not happen for programs that have had a 7-year bowl drought.
Yeah, that's the amazing part for sure. And like you said, I mean, Nebraska put in the work. It put in the work under Scott Frost. It put in the work, I think, to another level under Matt Rule. We know he went out there in the spring for a visit. Obviously, you see the video circulating still of Raiola throwing the bones at the men's basketball game at Nebraska. and just getting a hero's welcome, signing stuff outside PBA afterwards. I think he was at Haymarket Park for a baseball game the next month when he came back. So like, this is not an example. This isn't like the portal where you go in and you go into like speed dating mode. Like, this was a relationship that they obviously had for a long time. And typically, like you hear it from coaches all the time now, where like, if a guy commits, you don't close the door on them anymore, because who knows, they might come back around in the portal. And this is like that, except it happened before signing day, which nobody anticipated that was going to be the case. But it's a testament, I think, to their doggedness of staying on him, to the foundation that they laid ahead of time. And yeah, it's remarkable. What I'm kind of curious about too, and I'd be curious your guys' thoughts, like, how does the timing of the Raiola move coincide with what Nebraska is doing with Kyle McCord? Do you feel like that was something that they were pursuing with him before they knew what might be going on with Dylan, or are these two moves somewhat related, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I was trying to figure out why now. Why at the last minute? With Saturday, 1 week out. I don't get it. What changed? And what does Nebraska have to offer? Not necessarily the NIL, but in terms of a quarterback coach, the offense, and because they're. I mean, do these two quarterbacks, are they okay? I mean, they're I guess they're going to run one offense, so they're both okay with that offense. So I mean, I guess, and a supporting cast. I'm sure Dylan watched the season. Maybe he liked the way Rule coached, or I mean, he looked at the offensive line. His uncle can tell him all about that, I guess. But receivers, running backs, I just wonder why now. What's he seeing that they're going to get, and I'm anxious to see how it all unfolds, I guess. When they're going after a 5-star receiver, aren't they, in the portal? Is he coming? I guess, I don't know. I mean, why now?
Yeah, I think the 5-star that you're talking about, Thomas, Julian Fleming, who was a teammate of McCord's at Ohio State. The upside for a guy like that would the highest ceiling would be a Trey Palmer. That Julian Fleming was playing with guys that were just really, really good, and so he didn't get the ball as much. I don't think that I would describe Fleming as like a Palmer, but I think he could be a good addition. Evan, to your question, I think they had to do something in the portal, irrespective of whether they're getting Dylan Raiola. What I will say is, there is a path forward for these two guys. I mean, together. There's a documented evidence that 5-star quarterbacks do just fine redshirting their first year. Most of them do not play as true freshmen, or do not play a lot. Caleb Williams worked his way into a starting job at Oklahoma after Spencer Rattler got hurt, but Caleb Williams did not play a snap against Nebraska, not one, in the 2021 season. And so, that was pretty notable. There's a bunch of other guys that really just didn't play. Drake May, I think, threw 10 passes. Bryce Young threw 2. Maybe I've got those transposed. CJ Stroud barely played as a true freshman, sitting behind Justin Fields. Kyle McCord didn't really play behind CJ Stroud for 2 years. It's pretty common for 5-star guys to sit. Now the reason it's common, this is key, is they're going to schools that have other 5-star guys. This will not be the case as it relates to Nebraska. So LSU's got a big time player named Walker Howard who's going to take over for Jaden Daniels next year, but Jaden Daniels was playing. The difference here is that Dylan Raiola, in theory, would come in and play right away. What Nebraska, I think, is trying to do, and I think it would be beneficial to Raiola, is to sign Kyle McCord. Kyle McCord is term limited. He has 1 year left unless he gets hurt. He can only play 1 year. You play that guy. He's a seasoned vet, fourth year guy. He will help mentor Raiola into the position. And then after McCord's 1 year, Dylan Raiola is a redshirt freshman who's played in 4 games, and he assumes the role of starter. And he's probably a lot more grown up, and he's a lot more seasoned, and he's ready to do maybe some of the things he didn't do as a true freshman. And it's kind of the best of both worlds. This is the way you want to do it if you can pull it off. Most schools like Nebraska can't. The last time they had an opportunity to do it, of course, people remember, was 2018 when they chose not to sign Joe Burrow. They just didn't. I mean, I think Joe Burrow would have come here if Nebraska had pursued it. They didn't do it. I defended Nebraska's decision at the time. I cannot take that back. But here is the opportunity to get it over again, where instead of forcing Dylan Raiola like Nebraska forced Adrian Martinez to play right away, they have an opportunity to bring in another guy and Raiola can sit. And so if they're able to pull this off, they've not only addressed their immediate future, but their long-term future. And it would be a hell of a coup. I mean, it would be as good of a recruiting coup as we've seen since the Bill Callahan era and Bill Callahan got Dominic Sue. That's how big it would be. And everybody knows what Sue meant to this program. And I think Dylan Raiola could mean that much too. So it's a huge week. If they pull all this stuff off, they are the story of the recruiting signing day. They're the story of it. I mean, everybody's going to want to talk to Matt Rule. Pat McAfee did yesterday, but he's going to be the only guy that wants to talk to Matt Rule if they pull this off.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, and I thought Matt Rule put on display on that McAfee show a lot of probably what he's doing in living rooms and doing behind the scenes. Like he's steadfast about the big picture. He's relatable. He's smart. Like all the stuff that we know. Not to gush, but like you can see how that would be absolutely effective in some of these rooms. And he made a point on the show too of saying, gone are the days where you sort of make a sales pitch and gloss it over and tell guys what they want to hear. Like you're going to lay it out to them. So I have no doubt that like the conversations with the Raiola family behind the scenes are probably exactly what you're talking about, Sam, where, hey, if they get McCord, don't expect to come in and start right away. Red shirt, go through that process and then be the guy the next year. So like, having Rule kind of steering the ship, I think has been so key in this process. And I mean, talk about like roster management too, right? I mean, you're still roughly 15 over scholarship. You've got, you're retaining guys like Isaac Gifford and Bryce Benhart. You're finishing out your high school class now with some drama. You're still going through the portal. Like there's so many moving pieces to this thing. You have to be absolutely on top of it and be able to strike when there are opportunities, like even opportunities that maybe they didn't expect to have a week ago. So major props to them for, being in position for it. What do they say that luck is the intersection of being prepared and opportunity? And it kind of feels like that's been the case for what Nebraska's got right now.
Well, Evan, if they get Raiola, what sort of impact? I know everybody's looking at what would happen with like Kalen and maybe some guys he helped bring to Nebraska, but what would be the impact of getting Raiola on signing day? Would they get maybe other flips? Would that tend to hold maybe the class together, knowing that he's going to be your quarterback? I mean, if you're Carter Nelson, you like that? I guess. I mean, is that got to be a good thing, right? I mean, so I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'd be curious what Sam would say too. But I mean, Raiola was on a lot of these unofficials for multiple occasions. He was mixing it up with Carter Nelson and everybody else on those unofficials. I know he was when he was back in March and they had their big tentpole recruiting event. So I think kind of what we talked about with Raiola being familiar with Nebraska, I think because he's been around so much, the other commits in the class are pretty familiar with him too. And like, I think, high school kids today are pretty savvy about the process as well. I think they understand, you're going to have sort of some of these situations when you're trying to build a major contender in college football, and it's more of a business. I think people understand that. As far as flips, like I would be surprised if you see many others, just because of how late it is in the process, and because there's so few spots available, just with Nebraska commits and who's coming back and everything. But I mean, maybe that impacts the future class, and certainly, like, if nothing else, it gives fans, something to be excited about going into the offseason. And I would add this, like, what if Nebraska had won one of their last 4 games down the stretch and they were 6-6? Do you think, I wonder if they would have the bandwidth, just in terms of resources, to be able to pull off what they're pulling off, if they had to worry about practices and all the rest. So, like, who knows? Maybe we'll look back in a couple of years and see that losing those last few games, and as much as it stunk in the moment for them not to go to a bowl game, maybe that's something that aided in what they're able to do right now too.
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is that sometimes clarity can help you. And I thought the losses to Michigan State, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and to be clear, I thought they played pretty well against Wisconsin, so I don't think that was the problem. But the other 3 games were, and specifically Michigan State, I think it just made it obvious. And you almost don't have to, you can go back to everybody and say, look, man, we love you. We scored 18 points a game this year. This isn't going to be good enough. And, we love what you did, and we appreciate everything you did. And Heinrich, you put your body on the line for us. Thank you for doing that. I think you would agree, Heinrich, that we can't run the option like that again, because it'll get you hurt. So we need to consider making some upgrades to our passing offense, and that means we're going to go out in the portal and look for throwers. So I think that there was some clarity provided there. It wasn't going to be one of these deals where it's like, well, Chuba's going to start in the bowl game, and we'll see how he does. And what if he played really well? And the conversation is just less complicated. And again, what I would also say is it just doesn't matter what already happened. It matters in the sense that you learn from it. But, like, everybody in that program knows that over the next 3 years, the new Big Ten is the focus. You have to play really, really good football from here on out. It's not like and you can talk about the close wins, and I appreciate Rule saying that to McAfee. Some of the close losses will become close wins and all those things. And I get it. I totally get it. But I think everybody there knows that the caliber of football has just got to go way up on the offensive side of the ball. So they had to go out and find a guy like McCord. We'll have some other podcast some other time. If he signs, we'll have a good conversation about him. I've watched a lot of him now, and I know you've talked to some people out there, and interesting player who I think brings some really good things to the table. There's some other things that they're going to have to shape in order to make him comfortable. And then, Dylan Raiola is, I'm not saying he's a once in a generation talent. But out of the guys that have been, signed, let's say in the last 3-4 years in college, I've looked at all those guys' tape. I love doing that. I'm kind of a nerd. He's second to Caleb Williams in potential. I mean, I feel that way. Caleb Williams is probably the most talented, but then I think you're absolutely looking at Dylan. Jaden Daniels has to run around to make plays. He can't do it from the pocket the way that Dylan can. I mean, Dylan can throw every pass, and so can Caleb Williams. And, quarterbacks get hurt doing what Jaden Daniels is going to try to do in the NFL. He did it in college, and it was super, and they had superstars at LSU, and, Michael Penix doesn't have a strong arm, so there's all kinds of things that you can look at. But Dylan actually has NFL potential, elite 70-yard arm, no joke, 70 yards in the air, 65 to 70 yards in the air, can make all the throws, fluid motion, former catcher. So when he throws it, it's real pretty. Throws like Tom Brady, has that kind of motion. Can also come sidearm. There's all kinds of stuff that's so good about the way that he can play the game. And I just don't know that Nebraska has been able to take advantage of that yet. Like, once he gets there, then you'll be able to say to 2025 recruits, okay, here's what we know about this kid. Here's what we think you can be true of him. We're going to run routes with you that NFL teams run. We're going to throw go routes that are 60 yards long because he can throw it, and it won't be underthrown. And so you run a 4.3 and you're a 5-star. Come run under his passes. He'll be here. So I think those are things that they can probably share. I think it's important they get McCord for this whole thing to work. And it's not because I don't think Dylan couldn't do it next year, but I think a lot would be asked of him if he was having to be put in that position, and he would have to go through what every true freshman goes through, which is just learning how to live life as an adult away from your family and out of high school. And so I think that'll be something he's got to get through. And um, if he has to play right away and they don't get McCord, I think it's one of these, like, everybody's kind of looking around and going, okay, we got to get this guy ready. Who's our quarterback coach? Is it Marcus again, or is it somebody else? Maybe someone else. What, and how are we going to build an offense, and what are we going to do? And we've got to be real clear with some of our receivers of, hey man, it's time. Whatever you were thinking before, you don't have time now. This kid's going to throw you the ball wherever you are on the field. This isn't going to be you got to grow up real fast. And so it would help if McCord was able to do that, because McCord can come in as a senior and he can kick people in the butt. You know what I mean? Kyle McCord can do that for you. Like, he can come in and say, listen, I played here, here, and here. This is what Marvin Harrison did. So this is what you're going to do, because this is what I'm going to tell you to do. Dylan can't do that. Like, he can't naturally come in and say, no, listen, here's this guy that I played with at Buford. I mean, that doesn't. So it's crucial that McCord come in and and train this team to be better. And he is in position to do it because he has done it. He did it at Ohio State. He worked for Ryan Day. He threw to those receivers. He can come in and make very specific points about, listen, man, I know what it's like to throw to the best receiver in college football. Here's what you got to do. And that's credibility. And Dylan is a more talented player, and I think has a higher ceiling than McCord by some margin. But he can't tell them that, right away. So to me, it's a combo. You got to get them both. And I think Nebraska will get them both. But, until they do it, they haven't done it yet.
I'd be curious to hear, like, to play out that hypothetical in a situation where, for whatever reason, Nebraska does not get McCord, but Raiola comes. Like, could you put Chubba Purdy out there as the starter next year and continue to redshirt Raiola and let him learn behind the scenes? I mean, Purdy's going to be a fifth-year college quarterback next year. He started games last year and looked good, and Matt Rule was complimentary of him. Like, could you envision a situation where Raiola would continue to redshirt, and you rely on some of the other veteran guys that are there, or you go back to the portal in the spring? Maybe not.
I know I have an opinion, but I didn't know if Tom had a thought.
Well, I mean, I don't think ideally you want to start a high school, a true freshman. I think you want to ease him in. So, is Chubba the guy who can help him ease in? Yeah, maybe. Another thing is the schedule next year kind of comes in two halves, and the first half is not as tough as the second half. So I don't know what that means, but I think you could certainly play Raiola in his 4 games maybe, and let him get out there. Quarterbacks don't often make impacts as true freshmen, but if you tailor the offense, if you around what he does best, just to get him out there, maybe you could do that. But yeah, I think ideally you want McCord to be there, right? I mean, we'll see what happens, but I don't know what McCord's other options are right now either, because a lot of the dance cards have the musical chairs. So a lot of the chairs have been filled. So I don't know where else he might go.
I don't know that there's a ton of places. Indiana's got a spot. I don't think Indiana's a better spot than Nebraska. Michigan State, in theory, does. I don't know what Michigan State's doing, and I don't know that you want to be a part of that. I don't know. That's a total rebuild, and I think Nebraska's a year ahead of where Michigan State's going to be. Granted, Michigan State beat Nebraska this year, but I think Michigan State's going to have to tear the whole thing down and build it back up because what they had wasn't going to work. So I think Nebraska's a good spot for him. Evan, I mean, again, I would say, of course, Dylan Raiola can be the only guy in this picture. You're just kind of going through what you went through with Adrian Martinez. Now, Raiola is a better player, in my opinion, than Martinez was coming out of high school, in part because Martinez didn't play as a senior, and Raiola did, and again, you just watch it on film. Raiola really is really good. So there's that. But I mean, the other thing is, it's just going to take time. So yeah, could Chuba Purdy play? Yeah, I mean, he's in the role of Tristan Gebbia. And Nebraska made a choice. Scott Frost made two choices. Honestly, he made a choice not to pursue Joe Burrow because they believed that Gebbia would transfer. And then they made a choice to start Adrian Martinez anyway, which led to Tristan Gebbia's transfer. And I've always defended the first decision. I don't know that I've ever tried to defend the second one. I don't know that there was a defensible. I think you could have played Gebbia and you could have started with him and then eased Adrian in. They decided not to do that, and they ended up losing. They never got Burrow, and they lost Gebbia anyway. So I would, I don't know. I mean, I think you've got to find out who's going to be there. Chuba can transfer if he wants to. I think he's going to graduate, which gives him the opportunity to go somewhere. Where would he go? I don't know. Based on the tape that he's provided, it looks like Group of Five. I don't know what Indiana's story is going to be. Hard to say. And then you've got Harburg. And I just, Heinrich has to grow as a player. He has to get a lot better. And then Heinrich also has the opportunity to play a different position. So maybe he would want to do that. All those variables are going to be on the table. A week from now, it's going to be signing day, and Matt Rhule's going to be sitting down there at wherever the heck they decide to have it, whether it's on the 6th floor or down in the Hawks Center. I hope it's in the Hawks. I like that more now. And he'll have to lay all those things out. And by then, I'm sure they hope they know. They'll know on Raiola by then. I think they may already know. I'm sure they hope they know about McCord by now. I'm sure they hope they will know about him.
Well,
go ahead.
Whatever happens, guys, none of this is really a surprise for the guys on the team right now, because this is what happens when you have a major rebuild. And the first year of a new coach, there's a lot of guys who leave and some who stay. But a lot of guys chose to stay, and they're going to bring some other guys in at key positions after the first year. So this is what happens, and a lot of positions aren't, not everything's promised. There's no guarantees, and there's. But I will say, I find it interesting that there hasn't been a lot of movement away from Nebraska into the portal. That speaks well for what Rhule built so far.
Yeah, 3 departures. That'll be a storyline for sure to watch into the spring. Maybe the bulk of that attrition won't come until the writing's on the wall with depth charts and things like that in the spring. And that's kind of how it played out last year. If you remember, I mean, they were over 100 scholarships at this time last year as well, and had to figure it out and get down. So it's, it's a better spot to be than if you had like 70 guys and you had to backfill and bring in a bunch of players. But yeah, I think, we kind of talked about it. Like, was year one a success from the standpoint of getting to a bowl game in the postseason? No, but I think it was absolutely a success from a cultural standpoint. And just, you talk about buy-in and things like that. Like, you could just feel it from the players whenever they would speak. And I think you're seeing their actions affirm that now you've only had 3 scholarship players that have left to this point. You've had key guys return, whether that was Gifford or Benhart or Ty Robinson, even before the season was over, saying, yeah, I'm back in. So yeah, I think that all sets up well. Rhule said on the McAfee show yesterday, he'd like it to be a 90% high school development sort of operation with maybe 10% out of the portal. And it does seem like that's sort of where we are right now with this team. So like, it's funny because there's been so much focus on the quarterback position, and rightfully so, but like in a grand sense, it really hasn't been all that active for Nebraska relative to the last couple of years. Guys aren't coming and going. There's just been a really few high profile positions that we've locked in on.
Encouraging as it relates to the offensive and defensive lines. I think that's an area where you want there to be a lot of continuity, and they've had it so far. They are going to bring in an FCS defensive back, tall kid, 6'3", 170, potentially to play corner. Because if we're honest, right now they got two corners. They got Hartzog and Hill, and then after that, they're relying on Ethan Nation or Sincere Seifel. I can't remember how to say his last name. I should know it, but I don't. And Boodle's younger brother, Dwight, and Mario Buford coming in. I mean, those are basically their corner options, so they had to bring in a transfer there. I do wonder, and we'll have to see what happens, whether the supporting cast gets a little bit of an upgrade too. I think Fleming is a good addition to the program. If he decides to come, he can replace Billy Kemp, and they need a replacement for Billy Kemp. And then I still wonder about a running back spot. The one thing we don't know, Evan, is what they really think of Quentin Ives. My understanding is they think Quentin Ives is really good, and so he may be an ace that we're just not aware of. An ace in their pocket that nobody's going to know about until next season when we get to see him. So they may be saying, well, people don't know how good this kid is. We're not going to broadcast that, and that's why we're not adding a player. But when Tom mentioned adding some commits, I would absolutely, if Dylan Raiola signs on to this thing, I would call McKewon Lacey and I'd say, how do you like us now? I think you have to. I think you have to, and that kid has to consider it. Because if you've got a kid that can throw the ball the way Raiola had, and we won't go into this too much today, but there's so many things that then become true of your run game. One of which is those two safeties cannot sit in the box. I mean, Dylan's got too strong of an arm. He can throw an intermediate route, like you're throwing a little Nerf ball through the wind, like with the wind. And that's how good of a passer he is. And when you put those two safeties back, you're telling a running back, listen, man, all you gotta do is make one linebacker miss, and it's you against the safety. And so all those things, I know Rule talks about that when he talks about, to recruits. And I would call back, man. I would be like, hey, just so you know, this is what we're bringing in. Now, next year it's going to be Kyle McCord, and he's pretty darn good. But years 2, 3, and 4 of your career at Nebraska are going to be a guy that can throw it 70 yards. And you know what those safeties are going to do? They're not going to be in the box. So why don't you come here? Now that he'd have to say no to Alabama, which is hard, or Texas, which is hard. But those are the kind of conversations you can begin to have. It would help if Dylan Raiola announced his commitment this weekend, so you got a couple days to make the phone call. Or Dylan has a couple days to make the phone call. You know what I mean? Like, he can make that call. Is Nate Frazier open? I don't know. I mean, he visited. So all those little things, all those little dynamics are in play, but you've got to lock down the two quarterbacks, and then they can start making phone calls themselves. They can start working that, but that's got to be finalized, and they haven't finalized it yet.
For what it's worth, like, it doesn't all have to play out in the next week either. I mean, if those quarterbacks come, then maybe a Lacey or Frazier, whomever, they just don't have to sign in the early period. If potentially you could continue that thing into January. There is still the old traditional signing day in early February. So I think that's the other thing to watch, is not necessarily, okay, do they flip somebody this week, which maybe they do, but additionally, who maybe puts off their decision. Daniel Keelan could be an example of that, as he tries to figure things out, depending on how things shake out. Maybe, he doesn't necessarily have to sign anywhere this week. He can wait and evaluate his options later too. So like, there is a sense of urgency in some ways, but in others, like, there is that ability to push it down the road a little. So I'd say watch for that as well.
Guys, my favorite thing this week though was probably the Ben Hart and Gifford video, and I just love that. It's just such an underrated thing that they're doing, and along with Ty Robinson and Nash. And I just think these guys that are coming back that are so big, the first year, of a new coach, it's all about the coaches. They have to install the culture and the system, and they have to be on top of these players and really make sure it gets done the way they want to, and they got to discipline them and all that stuff. But the second year, everybody kind of knows what needs to be done, and the way they want it done, and to be able to have these older guys come back, I think they're all potential captain type guys. They're all. I know Rule doesn't like to just name 2-3 captains, but I think these are the kind of guys that can be leaders and make sure that these things are done in the off season, spring ball, over the summer, and it kind of gives you a head start. And then going into next year, they're really going to need to get up to a fast start. They got those first 6 games, and they really need to win a lot of those games. So I think having the older guys, the guys who came back, who can be potential leaders, is just really huge. It's sort of an underrated thing right now, not being talked about, except by us. But it's just sort of all the glitz will happen next week. But I really liked what those guys did, and the fact that they got those guys to come back, and no, forget NFL. Just they didn't transfer. They wanted to be here. So I think there's a lot of good messages there, and I think it's going to help play out.
Agreed. We're going to have a ton of recruiting coverage, obviously, next week. Some of this changes with Raiola's potential commitment. I think we have a pretty good handle on the class, and we'll have some fun stories next week on some of the higher profile players in the class. But we had planned on going to Bellevue West on Wednesday, and it was going to be the T-Bird triplets, and it's probably not going to be the T-Bird triplets now. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be awkward, and that happens. That's the nature of the thing. But so this certainly changes the conversation, and it also changes a lot of dynamics with what everybody's expectation level is. Even the returning players, they're coming back, and I'm sure that there's part of me that believes that some of these guys kind of knew, like Matt Rule probably in a meeting was able to say, listen, we're going to explore all options with the quarterback. And he probably said it in a way where they understood that there was going to be a new factor in the room. I'm sure they knew that was going to be a possibility. And I'm sure Chuba and Heinrich knew that. And certainly Sims did, because he's leaving. But this other thing is it's just a whole new dynamic now. It's a whole new dynamic for that recruiting class too, because Danny had done a lot of the work, right? He had recruited kids. He came down with the sign at the volleyball game, and he was all in. And he was at the College World Series with Carter Nelson, and he was a driving factor in Carter not probably going to Georgia. So now you bring in this completely new guy, and he's great. He's the best player in the room, but it will change and it's going to take time for if Raiola decides to flip. I'm not saying he will, but let's say he does. It's going to take time for him to get to know the class. He knows them, but he doesn't know them the way he knows the Georgia commits. And, he's been to a lot of different high schools. I think it can be hard when you're moving around from high school to high school to kind of build a relationship with tons of people because you're gone in a year. So it's going to be an adjustment period for him too. Like it's a whirlwind deal. He's going to enroll here in January, and they go back and I don't know when they enroll anymore. It's like mid-January, but it's going to be a whirlwind, and it'll be different. That's why McCord is important, because you don't want a situation where you have to say, all right, you're here, you're a 5-star. Your whole life has changed. a month ago, you didn't know where you were going to be. Now, will you please prepare to deliver this team to a bowl game starting in 9 months? That's really hard. That's a lot to ask of a kid. And when you compare him to Chubba Purdy, I just don't know how Raiola is not going to emerge. When you compare him to Kyle McCord, I think that's where you can able to say, you come along at your own rate. We want you to grow and get better. You don't have to, we're going to put this guy out there because we know what we got there. That's the crucial piece here. And it's just going to change everything about, we're all making stops next week at the recruiting sites. I'm going to Omaha North. Evan's going to talk to Grant Bricks out in Logan Magnolia. Luke will be at the T-Bird signing. PAT, I think, is going to West Side. So if Raiola and McCord have signed by then, or they're committed, that's going to be the driving topic of conversation. What do you think? And so, it's really interesting. This is going to be a super interesting football season if these guys sign. The new Big Ten, these two guys, like you already said, Nebraska's bringing almost everybody back. It sets up as an important year. It sets up as a year where they could win some football games and also, break in a superstar. It'll be really interesting.
How about the paradigm shift from an NIL perspective? I mean, that's kind of the other element of this that we haven't discussed a ton, and it's been interesting because you watch like the activity of the 1890 initiative. They really just in the last week or so started ramping up awareness. Here on this Wednesday, they put out sort of this challenge to Husker fans saying they're trying to raise $500,000 by signing day, and it's going to be matched up to $250K by a generous donor and all this. So like, is this evidence that Nebraska's NIL is where it needs to be? Is this sort of striking while the iron's hot, so to speak, with just people's interest? Like, I guess, how has your opinion about Nebraska's operation from an NIL perspective changed in the last week with all this portal and Raiola news going on, or has it changed much?
Tom, you talked to Blake Lawrence about the real cost of quarterback.
Yeah, it was about 2 minutes. He didn't have much time, and I was driving, so it was a weird conversation. But yeah, it was one of the same things. But when I asked him, about the theory that a buddy of mine who works in a collective had, that Rule just threw that number. He threw those numbers out there trying to shake the trees a little bit of in the portal to get quarterbacks to leave, and Blake, he didn't laugh. He just said, "Well, if he did, that was a really smart move." So it was, he wasn't poo-pooing it at all. So yeah, I don't know. It's the whole 1890 thing to me is the NIL is something I'd like to know more about, and yet I don't want to know the numbers. I don't want to know how much these guys are making, because every time we write about them, we'll be thinking about a number. Whenever they make a good play or a bad play, everybody will be talking about the number. I don't want to know the number. So, and yet I do want to know the number, yet I don't. So,
I think the highest paid player in the portal in the NIL era for Nebraska is O'Shawn Mathis. That's what I think.
More than Casey Thompson?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do. That's my hunch. And that's gonna, I don't even know. Again, we'll need to talk to Dylan's team or Dylan. I just don't know what the NIL operation is going to be there. I don't think this kid is, or his family is about money. I think that's part of what I think Georgia's people are saying, but I don't think Georgia was a great fit for him. I don't know that I wrote that, but I never did think, and you and I have conversed about that. I always thought USC would be a right fit because it's out west. But my understanding is at USC, it just didn't, I don't know. It wasn't a fit, whether it's Riley or his staff or whatever. But I always thought Georgia was an odd fit for the guy.
Well,
he's a great player.
Let's make sure he gets here first. Okay.
Oh, I think it'll be an odd fit even if he goes there. It's not a knock on Georgia per se. It's an odd fit. And it's not because I just wondered, I don't know. To be honest with you, it's a school that has flourished without having to rely on 5-star quarterbacks for one thing. They have had multiple 5-stars transferred. Justin Fields transferred, Brock Vandegrift transferred. The kid that went, Jacob Eason transferred. Georgia under Kirby Smart has tended to prefer game managers who have high-level personalities but are not necessarily 5-star players. They have 5 stars everywhere else on the field, but Carson Beck and Stetson Bennett and Jacob Fromm were not necessarily the most talented quarterbacks. And so one of the reasons I thought it was an odd fit isn't because they're in a great team, but because I just wondered if they would be able to take full advantage of all the things that he can do. For example, I wouldn't have thought, like Oklahoma would have been a bad fit. I think that would have been a fun fit. So, anyway, we'll see what happens. I think Nebraska would be a better fit for Raiola, but yeah, we'll see what happens. Any hoops? They beat Michigan State. Were you? I don't even know. Were you at that game, Tom? Or
yes, and yeah, it was a good win. I thought that was kind of held things together. I think if you lose that one, a lot of doubt creeps in, and it's it's a Michigan State team that they needed to beat, and a lot of the doubt now is on the Michigan State side. So I thought that was, especially the way Nebraska won it, they needed to make a stand, and they did. So now it's on to K-State, and we'll see what they can do there. But they're probably going to end the non-conference with including the Michigan State win, and we're probably going to have at least 10 wins. So that's a good start, a good first half. But the Big Ten right now is weird. So we'll see what they can do the rest of the way. But whatever happened against Minnesota, that they have to make sure that doesn't happen again. So.
Does Michigan State, did they bring a couple beat writers to the game? They did, right?
5.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what a blue blood program looks like.
Yep.
So I listened to the press conference and the tone of the questions. They're pretty tough.
Oh yeah. But Izzo's tough too. I mean, he can take it, and he knows all those people. So yeah, that's what you do.
Beating Michigan State to me is like, I don't know. It's like beating Northwestern twice. I know one only counts for one, but it's still a big deal. It's Michigan State. Like, even if they don't have a great team, you're still beating the logo. You're still beating the coach. So
right.
They play K-State on Sunday, a reunion with Arthur Kaluma, who appears to be having a good season.
Yes.
I think that's going to be an interesting game. If Nebraska were to win that game, they might show up in some brackets. If. All right. I think that's all we have for this week. We will be back next week, hopefully, to talk about Nebraska volleyball winning a national championship. We'll know that by Sunday. We'll be back next Thursday. And by then, we'll know at least about Raiola, I think. And we may know about McCord, and we'll have all the signing day recap stuff, and we'll have some volleyball stuff hopefully to discuss too. So it'll be a fun, full podcast next week. For Tom and Evan, I'm Sam. Thanks for listening to the Pick Six Podcast.